A hard-working young woman is found bleeding in the street.
This is Burnett County 911.
He thought it was just a pile of trash until he saw the legs and then blood.
Oh my God, holy.
First responders struggle to put the pieces together.
There were 4 casings found at the crime scene.
What happened and who could be the cause behind all this?
Was she killed by a jealous lover?
She had been previously unfaithful.
Or by a stranger with an obsessive delusion?
She had a great body and she made great money dancing.
Can the police bring her killer to justice?
He tells them the same story that he had told everyone.
When we asked him if he knew that he shot her, he nodded.
Everything just happened so fast.
September 12, 2020. It's early Saturday morning in Beaufort, Georgia, a suburban bedroom community of almost 20,000.
Beaufort, Georgia is about 45 minutes northeast of Atlanta.
Beaufort gives you a nice small town feel, but still close to the city.
It's a very upscale area without all of the hustle and bustle of the inner city.
It's the last place you expect to find someone lying in the middle of the street.
This is Burnett County 911. You can prior medical.
The 911 call came in approximately at 5:11 in the morning.
There's someone like on the road, like laid down, and there's like blood on the ground.
The 911 operator is doing their best to calm him down, but he is in full panic mode.
The caller explains that he had just turned into the subdivision where he lives when he saw something in the road.
The caller states that he originally thought it was a pile of trash on the ground.
But as he pulled up closer, he saw legs and then realized that what he was looking at was a body.
Is it a male or female?
I have no idea. Like I drove by, and like I saw them.
The 911 operator dispatches police and paramedics to the caller's location.
When paramedics arrive on the scene, they're able to tell that it's a young African-American woman.
But unfortunately, there's nothing they can do for her.
She has a gunshot wound to her head.
First responders are able to then identify her as 20-year-old Shakia Smith.
Shakia had always lived life to the fullest.
Shakia Smith was someone that was carefree, always smiling.
She loved life, she loved her family. Everywhere she went, she just brought smiles and laughter to the group. She was just a ball of light.
She was also ambitious.
She had goals of going to college and even owning her own home.
She really had a vision for what she wanted her life to look like.
But she soon discovered that pursuing her dreams required money.
She worked a lot of different fast food jobs. But Shakia realized that that was not going to be enough for her to live the type of life that she wanted.
So she found a more lucrative career: exotic dancing.
In Atlanta, that is a quick route for women who are beautiful to make money.
So she decided to take that route to get to her goals a lot quicker.
For Shakia, this was only a stepping stone on the path to her future.
This was not at all a long-term plan for Shakia. Shakia had planned on using the money that she got from dancing to pay for college so that she could really start to work towards her goals.
Soon, she was making good money.
Shakia was really good at it. Not only was she a good dancer, but she was also very charismatic. She had the perfect personality to do this job. And so she became very successful at it.
And it was through her work that she met the equally successful Moses Dial.
He was known for not just promoting, but also producing music videos.
Moses was a jack of all trades. He did a little bit of music videos, club promotions. He just knew how to get to the money.
He is about the life that Shakia is looking to have.
And he was only 25 years old.
Moses was tall, dark, and handsome. He was smart. He was funny. He had a military background. He was stable.
Yeah, I saw you up there.
Shakia introduced herself, and the chemistry was undeniable.
They just hit it off really quickly.
Soon, Moses and Shakia began seeing each other outside of the club.
Shakia and Moses' relationship really progressed.
They move in together, but not in a traditional sense. They move from place to place, staying at different hotels. They're living the nightlife. They're out and about.
They really enjoyed that lifestyle.
But now, Shakia is lying dead on the street, and a peaceful Atlanta suburb has become a crime scene.
Police questioned the driver who called 911 after seeing the body in the street, hoping he might have seen the shooter fleeing the scene.
Hey, did you see anything?
But he only caught a glimpse of the body and doesn't even know that it's a woman.
No, I got here fine. I drove past. I thought that he was like a highway traffic. Okay.
But then he saw the blood.
Okay.
Officers hope they have better luck with the residents of the neighborhood.
Police began knocking on the doors and questioning the neighbors, hoping that someone had witnessed what happened.
No one they talked to saw anything.
But one neighbor states that he did hear about 4 to 5 gunshots before the 911 call came in.
I heard the gunshots about right after 5 in the morning. And then after that, it was like a car driving like really fast.
"20-year-old Shakia Smith had big plans for the future.
She wanted to attend college and she envisioned buying a home for herself. She knew what she wanted her life to be.
She turned to exotic dancing as a way to earn money.
Particularly here in Atlanta, a lot of young ladies see it as an easy way to make quick money and use it as a way to catapult their way to the next thing that they want to do.
She's young, so she wasn't going to do it long. She just needed enough to save up for college.
And while working in the club scene, she met the person she wanted to build her future with, 25-year-old Moses Dial.
He was known for not just promoting, but also producing music videos, and he would bring on videographers and he would bring on dancers.
But now her dreams have died in the middle of a quiet suburban street.
Shakia's body's just dumped, and she's just laying there, covered in blood.
The blood was still wet, and so the officers knew that this must have happened recently.
Police believe she died from a gunshot wound to the head.
On the ground near the body, the officers find 4 shell casings.
Right in the middle of the blood right here. Oh. That's one of the middle. Yeah, it's a tiny little case.
They figured it might have been done with a .22.
Canvassing the neighborhood in search of witnesses provides few details about the shooting.
We had no witnesses that actually saw the incident.
There was a few neighbors who said that they had actually heard gunshots.
How many shots did you hear?
I will say 4 or 5.
And then, one neighbor heard the sound of a car speeding away.
Detectives asked the neighbor about the sound.
Was it like maybe like an Asian import car, like the high-pitched sound, or was it like a low sound?
Like a low sound.
He said that the car that they heard speed off actually sounded like a race car.
And as police go from door to door, officers notice something that could blow the case wide open.
We apologize for waking up in the morning.
The officers realized that some of the homes in the community actually have doorbell cameras.
So, can you tell me, does your camera, does it see anything that's happening in the roadway?
There is one house that has a camera that was facing the area.
If you would just go through your footage, if you see or hear any gunshots, we would like to know about that, please. Yep, absolutely.
They're hoping the security camera captured the whole incident.
If that camera can see anything through these trees, I'll be surprised.
But when the footage is sent to detectives assigned to the case, they see more than just trees.
Homicide? I received a phone call from one of my sergeants who informed me that there was a homicide and that the neighbors had footage.
And viewing the footage, they do see a car entering the neighborhood, but they can't make out the license plate, nor do they see who's driving the car.
Despite that, the video has a story to tell.
You could hear a male yelling.
They could hear faint voices. It sounded like an argument, and then the next thing they heard were 4 gunshots.
It's an important piece of evidence.
The video gave them the exact time of the shooting, and now they have a suspect, the man whose voice they could hear shouting.
But it doesn't explain what happened.
The footage doesn't give them any inkling as to who did it and what the motive was.
However, while police are still knocking on doors, the detectives are notified of a second 911 call that was made shortly after the call reporting Shakia in the street.
They got another 911 call from a man who was completely frantic.
Location of your emergency.
I'm calling because I'm trying to find my girlfriend.
The caller said he had gotten into an argument with his girlfriend while they were on their way to pick up a friend.
They got into an argument, and she abruptly gets out of the car.
When she walked, I tried to talk to her, and she was just like, "Oh, don't even talk to me.
You please just leave me alone." He tries to follow her and convince her to get back in the car.
Next thing I know, she hopped into the next car that was coming the opposite way.
He says she jumped into the car with someone else and drove off.
The caller said that he tried to follow them, but he lost track of the car.
He was very afraid that something has happened to her.
They're able to put together that this is Moses, and he is calling about his girlfriend, Shakia Smith.
Detectives investigating the murder of 20-year-old Shakia Smith have just learned that around the time of the shooting, her boyfriend called 911 requesting help to find her.
Moses Dial told the operator that he was afraid that something terrible had happened to his girlfriend.
He had no idea that Shakia was dead.
On the call, Moses explained that they had gotten into an argument after he picked Shakia up from work.
He says the argument starts when she starts going through his phone.
Who's this? A friend.
My girlfriend's reading stuff on my phone, and she's just like, oh, why are you still texting this girl?
Shakia gets upset with him.
Shakia is livid with this text message. She doesn't understand why he's still texting this girl, and it just spirals from there.
Shakia was drunk, yelling at him.
I'm just like, hey, chill out. I'm just talking business with this other girl. What is the problem?
And suddenly the argument escalated and became dangerous.
She becomes irate and eventually pulls out her gun.
She pulls out the gun. I'm just like, oh, you about to shoot me now?
Shakia says no, and she tells him to just leave her alone, and she just jumps out of the car.
Moses tries to follow her and convince her to get back in the car.
Don't text that other girl on your phone.
Can you please get in the car?
Can you please leave me alone, Moses?
But he says from there she jumped into the car with someone else and drove off.
Does she know the person at all?
No, because we're not even from around this area, man.
Kia!
He described a dark-colored passenger car picking up Shakia getting into that car and leaving.
Moses said he tried to follow them, but it was too late.
He says that by the time he made the turn, they were long gone and he had no idea where they were.
Moses told the operator he wasn't really alarmed. At first.
Moses states this isn't new. She's jumped in the car with strangers before. She does this when she gets upset.
She'll hop into somebody's car and won't come back until about 11 o'clock in the morning.
But he said this time felt different.
I have my friend trying to look around for her too, and I try calling her mom. Her mom's not answering.
During this conversation, 911 is trying to find out where Moses is. He tells them that he is somewhere on Buford Highway.
The dispatcher then asks Moses to pull over and give them his exact location so that the police could find him and help him search for Shakia.
At that moment, the phone gets disconnected.
The dispatcher tried to call Moses back several times, but unfortunately, they got hit with a voicemail that's not set up.
After listening to the recording, detectives reach out to Moses and get the same voicemail.
Sorry, but the person you called has a voicemail box that has not been set up yet.
Before detectives can track Moses down, a new lead develops at the crime scene.
A mutual friend of both Moses and Shakia, Charlene James, comes to the crime scene.
Charlene told the officers working the scene that Moses Dial and Shakia were on their way to pick her up early that morning when they got into an argument.
And she confirms what Moses told the 911 operator.
Charlene says that Shakia had hopped out of Moses' car and hopped into the car of a stranger.
She hopped in a car of that car. They rode up the neighborhood.
When they asked Charlene where did she get that information, she says Moses told her that.
She says that Moses told her that he tried to chase them and that he has been driving around ever since trying to find her.
Well, I don't know how she ended up back over here, but she did. And I guess out.
Charlene says she isn't sure where Moses is now.
Charlene said that Moses had linked up with Shakia's mom, and together the two of them were looking for Shakia way on the other side of town.
She gives the police Shakia's mom's number.
Police give her mother a call and ask her to go down to the station.
When they call Shakia's mom, Moses is not with her, but she does agree to come down to the station and have a conversation with them.
Police also asked Charlene to follow them to the police headquarters.
When Shakia's mother arrives, they give her the bad news.
I'm sorry.
Despite her grief, she's determined to do what she can to help solve her daughter's murder.
Mom tells the police that she did receive a call from Shakia at 4 a.m.
I know I got back when I was asleep.
2 hours later, Moses called her and told her that Shakia was missing.
Moses explained to her that they had an argument and she had gotten out of his vehicle and entered somebody else's vehicle and left. And he was trying to locate her.
Shakia's mother, however, isn't as trusting as Charlene.
Shakia's mom lets the officers know that she actually doesn't believe this story.
Don't trust Moses.
She feels like Moses has been trying to kill her daughter.
How do you know he's been too much now?
The detective investigating the murder of 20-year-old Shakia Smith has just been told by her mother that she thinks Moses Dial, Shakia's boyfriend, has been trying to kill her.
Moses called her that morning to explain that he and Shakia had an argument. She had jumped out of his car and gotten into a stranger's car, and now he couldn't find her.
Shakia's mother says she doesn't believe Moses' story.
Don't trust Moses.
You don't trust Moses?
And I made that known to the police from every incident they've ever had.
Shakia's mom had told me that there was some kind of domestic dispute before.
They have a volatile relationship. Not necessarily violent, but volatile.
And now she believes that Moses shot her daughter.
How do you know he's been too much now?
Shakia's cousin Kyla was already at the station as support for her mother, so the detective speaks with her next.
Let's talk about Shakia, okay? What did you know that she was doing or who she was going to be with last night?
Kyla had actually been staying at the same hotel that Moses and Shakia had been staying in, just in a separate room.
I know she was going out, and her boyfriend dropped her off there. The last time I heard from her was like 11:58, and then after that, I went to sleep.
Kyla woke around 7 in the morning with Moses pounding on the door of her room.
He explained that Shakia was missing. Same story that he told Shakia's mom and the 911 call taker.
What's going on? Shakia.
But according to Kyla, Moses brought more than just the news of Shakia's disappearance.
Look, here's some more stuff.
In his hands, he has Shakia's personal belongings, and he's given it to Kyla.
He basically said, okay, she left me. I don't know where she's at. Here's her stuff.
At this point in the interview, Kyla hesitates.
I don't want to incriminate nobody with nothing. I just know that I smelled bleach.
You smelled bleach?
Yeah.
But she didn't just smell it.
So you never actually saw like a bleach bottle?
I did see the bleach bottle, and he had a rag over it. I just looked over the balcony and saw him taking it out the car.
She was very clear that she was not trying to imply that he had done anything, but she wanted to let them know everything that she had witnessed.
Growing increasingly suspicious of Moses, the detective then turns to Charlene James, Shakia's friend who'd spoken to officers at the crime scene.
So you and Shakia, you're best friends, right?
We real close.
Charlene says she was on the phone with Moses the morning Shakia was shot.
It was like 5 o'clock in the morning. And I wanted them to come get me. Her and her boyfriend.
Hey, give me like 15. I'll be here.
According to Charlene, the couple was not having a good night.
Shakia's friend told me that they had an argument.
Charlene could hear the whole thing.
They had an altercation. It was verbal, nothing physical.
But then the tone changed.
Right now, let me out.
Once they got to my side of town, that's when things like escalated. Because at that point, she wanted to leave.
Let me at the car.
Shakia asked to be let out of the car, and Moses abruptly ended the call.
Almost immediately, he calls her back and tells her that Shakia got out of the car.
Moses told her that Shakia had hopped out of the car and that she had actually got out of the car with her weapon and a bag of money.
She just jumped out the car and jumped in the car with somebody else.
Charlene says she'd never done that before.
They always be arguing, but it never got to this point where she hopped out the car.
She says that she absolutely believes that Shakia was intoxicated.
But getting in a stranger's car was dangerous.
Moses had reason to be concerned for his girlfriend.
She's carrying the tips that she made from the evening, so we're talking several $100s. Could that have been the motive for someone taking her life? Could it have been robbery?
The detective asks what kind of gun Shakia had, and Charlene says she's not sure.
It was a pink gun. Real pretty gun.
She doesn't know, she just knows that it's cute, it's pink, and it has little bullets.
The shell casings found at the scene were .22 caliber, and those are very small bullets. So now, detectives were thinking that maybe she was shot with her own gun.
But who pulled the trigger? The detective asks Charlene if she knows what Moses and Shakia were arguing about.
She found something in her phone.
He had seen a text message from a guy that she had cheated on him with.
Who is that?
Now that story's different than what Moses told the dispatcher.
Shortly before she was murdered, 20-year-old exotic dancer Shakia Smith had a major argument with her boyfriend, Moses Dial.
Their friend Charlene was actually on the phone when she heard them arguing, and then she heard Shakia say, "Let me out of the car."
No, pull the car right now, let me out.
Charlene James tells the homicide detective that the argument was over Shakia cheating on Moses.
Shakia had been unfaithful in the past.
She had sex with another man while Moses was out of town.
Moses was under the impression that Shakia had actually stopped seeing this gentleman.
And they had moved on from it.
Who is that?
But that night, Moses found evidence that it wasn't all in the past.
According to Charlene, they had been arguing because Moses saw something in Shakia's phone.
Apparently this text message was from that gentleman.
This the same person that she had intercourse with while her boyfriend was away.
Moses was completely blindsided.
That's the thing. He wanted it to stop, and she said it did.
Charlene speculates that she possibly ran into the guy at work.
I guess she seen him again at the club she was dancing at.
Shakia had hugged and possibly had kissed somebody in the parking lot.
Charlene didn't know that Shakia did anything with this guy that night. The text he sent her could have just been saying, "Hi," or "Good to see you again."
But Moses thought there was more to it than just some innocent messages.
Charlene says that Moses had actually confronted her about it and wanted Shakia to apologize.
Even tonight, he wouldn't get one. He wanted an apology.
Shakia is not trying to apologize, and instead she wants out of the car.
She was drunk. Let me out the car. You know when a person get caught doing something, they gonna be mad too.
Detectives need to speak to the one person who knows what really happened. Moses Dial. If they can find him.
Moses was last seen driving around, so investigators had asked Charlene if she knew what kind of car he drove. And she told them he was driving a Dodge Challenger.
With the focus on Moses, the detectives issued a be on the lookout for both him and his car, and they subpoenaed his phone records.
The police then receive a phone call from someone named Janelle.
Homicide.
Like Shakia, she's an exotic dancer.
So you and Shakia, you both work together?
Yeah, we're friends.
Janelle says that she was supposed to hang out with Shakia and Moses the night of the murder.
I ended up going to a party, and she was still at work, and he was supposed to be going to go get her and bringing her to where I was at.
She says they never showed up.
Janelle said the next morning she heard through a mutual friend that Shakia had been murdered.
And then around 11:45 a.m., Moses started texting her.
Moses didn't say anything in his messages about Shakia being dead. Janelle said that he was just texting her like it was just any other day.
She immediately blocked his number.
One of our mutual friends told me that 2 or 3 months ago, he said, like, he would kill her by running her.
It was a consensus between Shakia's family and friends that Moses had killed her.
Why would he do that?
Because, I think it was because she cheated on him.
Detectives now consider Moses a fugitive suspect.
Detectives are convinced that Moses is on the run. They obtain a warrant for his arrest for murder.
When his subpoenaed phone records come in, they get a lead on his location.
Detectives are able to track Moses through his phone's GPS.
Moses is traveling north.
The investigators aren't sure where Moses is going, but he seems to be trying to get as far away from Georgia as possible.
By this point, Moses hadn't just left Beaufort or even Atlanta. He was completely outside the state of Georgia.
And the subpoena gives detectives more than just the phone's GPS data.
Investigators got access to Moses' phone records, which showed all the internet searches he had made.
His search history proves to detectives that they're on the right track.
Moses has searched several items of interest.
He searched what was the sentencing guidelines for felony murder.
We have the right person, the right suspect.
Detectives in Georgia have issued a warrant for the arrest of Moses Dial for the murder of his girlfriend, Shakia Smith.
Only hours after Shakia was gunned down and left dead in the street, Moses' cell phone GPS showed him fleeing the state.
They don't know exactly where he is going.
But it's clear from his phone's search history what he's running from.
On September 18th, he searched, "What is felony murder sentence in Georgia?"
The Gwinnett County Police reach out to the United States Marshals for assistance.
The police bring in the U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force to locate him and bring him in.
Within 2 weeks, the Marshals do just that.
The U.S. Marshals located him in Atlantic City, in New Jersey.
Put your hands where I can see him. Oh, stop!
Moses is arrested without incident.
Put your hands behind your head. Turn around.
The following day, we traveled to New Jersey to interview him.
Detectives asked Moses if he knows why he's being questioned.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Why?
It's about my girlfriend, that situation.
He was very calm.
At that point, they confront Moses.
The detectives told Moses that they had audio and video from a home security camera in the neighborhood where Shakia was killed.
The electronic footage that we have of what happened, we're able to see your car pull into the neighborhood.
I told him that The incident was captured on a surveillance camera.
This is your opportunity to tell us the truth, okay?
I think he was shocked that she knew as much as she knew, and she just cornered him.
What do you think of that?
Moses finally breaks down and he tells detectives the whole night was just so crazy because she was just so drunk and irate.
He said he picked Shakia up from where she was working in Atlanta, and they traveled down towards Beaufort.
On the way, he got a text message.
As they were going to pick up Charlene, another exotic dancer reached out to him.
Hey, what are you even mad about?
And Shakia became angry. She was convinced that Moses was seeing the woman behind her back.
I was just like, baby, you need to chill out now. You need to stop. I understand you got a little jealousy when other females are around, but you gotta understand that it's not like I'm trying to talk to these girls.
But he says Shakia refused to calm down.
We got into it, and it was crazy because she was drunk, and she started cursing me out.
He tells them that Shakia started hitting him while he was driving, trying to take the wheel.
Moses claims that she even shot her gun out the window.
She popped a few shots off the highway, and was like, saying I'm a hoe and all this extra stuff, things like that. Then after that, she tried to point me on my way. I'm like, yo, you're drunk right now, you really chill.
Moses stops his vehicle and is trying to have Shakia chill, calm down.
That's when she got out of the car and I said, yo, chill out. I said, what are you about to do? She said, she's gonna just hop in the next person's car.
Moses tells them that that's when it happened.
But Moses says he has no recollection of exactly how Shakia ended up dead.
Everything just happened so fast, to be honest with you. Like, it's like I blacked out.
He was angry. They were arguing about one being unfaithful over the other, and they both got mad to the point where they got out of the car.
Hey, what are you doing? Huh?
I'm so done with you. Bye.
Get in the car.
Bye.
Get in the car. Hey, why you acting like this? Huh? How are you so done with me?
I moved on.
Moved on. Okay. Okay, so your feelings got involved? Huh? Just tell the truth. Just tell the truth. Tell the truth.
The detectives don't know why Moses killed Shakia.
What they are clear on is that they have a confession.
Who is that?
They were arguing, and even if it was with a split second in anger, he intended to kill her, period.
Moses Dial is charged with murder. And ultimately, the prosecutor decides to offer a plea deal.
I have seen 12 people, in the face of overwhelming evidence, come back with a not guilty. So I never bet on what a jury's gonna do.
Moses takes the plea deal and he's sentenced to life with the chance of parole.
In Georgia, Moses must serve at minimum 30 years before he could even start the parole process.
And he must publicly accept responsibility for what he did.
If he wanted to have any kind of life at the end, he had to admit what he did and plead guilty. And he did.
Shakia's family and friends have gotten justice, but they've lost far more.
Shakia will be remembered as someone who brought joy and laughter into the life of the individuals that loved her, that supported her, and that were blessed to have her in their lives. Moses took it upon himself to take the life of someone who all she did was love him.
Shakia had her whole life ahead of her. She just had so much going for her, and all that was cut short that night.
The bottom line is no one deserves that, no matter who they are.
At 2:17 in the morning, the telephone rang inside a quiet California house, and on the other end of the line a police dispatcher heard 3 words that would remain buried in an evidence file for more than 3 decades. "Someone is dead." The voice was calm. Too calm. Outside, rain was falling over the small town of Bellwether, California, a place where people locked their doors but rarely believed they needed to. It was October 18th, 1981. The streets were almost empty. The gas stations were closing. The neon signs along the highway flickered against the wet pavement. And on the edge of town, inside a modest 2-bedroom house on Alder Street, 27-year-old Laura Bennett was lying motionless on the kitchen floor. There was no broken window, no forced door, no obvious sign that anyone had entered. The back door was unlocked. A cup of coffee sat beside the sink. The radio was still playing. And on the refrigerator, beneath a faded photograph of Laura and her younger sister, someone had left a single fingerprint. At the time, investigators did not know whose it was. They photographed it. They dusted the surface. They lifted what they could. Then they placed the evidence into a paper envelope. For reasons that would become important 31 years later, that fingerprint never disappeared. Laura Bennett had been alive less than 3 hours earlier. Friends remembered her as organized, careful, and almost obsessively punctual. She worked as a bookkeeper at a local hardware company. She lived alone. She had no criminal record. She had no known enemies. Her mother later told investigators that Laura had been planning to visit her family the following Sunday. She never arrived. The first officer at the scene was Patrolman Daniel Mercer. He had been with the department for 6 years. When he entered the kitchen, he immediately noticed something strange. The house did not look like a crime scene. It looked like someone had simply stopped living. A chair was pulled away from the kitchen table. A plate had been washed and placed upside down beside the sink. A paperback novel lay open on the living room sofa. Laura's handbag was on the counter. Her wallet was still inside. Her keys were still there. Her car was parked outside. Nothing valuable appeared to be missing. The killer had not come for money. That meant something else had brought someone through the back door. At 2:31 a.m., detectives arrived. They searched every room. They checked the windows. They examined the locks. They looked beneath the bed. Inside closets. Behind furniture. Nothing. Then one detective noticed the refrigerator. There, near the handle, was a partial fingerprint. The ridge pattern was clear enough to lift. At the time, investigators believed it might belong to Laura. Then they compared it. It did not. That discovery changed the entire direction of the investigation. Someone else had been inside the house. Someone who had touched the refrigerator after Laura had apparently returned home. Someone who had left without taking anything. But who? The neighborhood offered few answers. One neighbor reported hearing a car around midnight. Another remembered seeing a man standing near the Bennett house. But descriptions were vague. White male. Average height. Dark jacket. That was all. By sunrise, the murder had already become the town's only subject of conversation. People stood on porches. Police cars lined Alder Street. Reporters arrived from the county seat. Laura's photograph appeared in the newspaper beneath a headline that would later become painfully familiar. Young woman found dead in her home. Police search for killer. Detectives interviewed everyone who knew her. Coworkers. Friends. Former boyfriends. Neighbors. Relatives. No one could explain why Laura had been killed. Her former boyfriend, Michael Ross, was questioned for almost 5 hours. He admitted they had argued weeks earlier. But he had an alibi. 2 coworkers confirmed he had been working at a restaurant across town. Another man, a mechanic named Stephen Hall, became briefly interesting to investigators because he had repaired Laura's car several months earlier. But there was no evidence connecting him to the house. The investigation slowly began to fracture into possibilities. Was Laura killed by someone she knew? Had a stranger followed her home? Had she opened the door willingly? Or had the killer entered while she was distracted? The fingerprint on the refrigerator seemed to promise an answer. But in 1981, fingerprints were not searched against a vast digital database. There was no nationwide automated system capable of comparing a partial print against millions of records in seconds. Investigators needed a suspect. Without a suspect, the print was almost useless. So the envelope went into evidence. And the years began to pass. Laura's mother kept calling the police. Every few months. Then every year. Eventually, the calls became less frequent. People moved away. Businesses closed. The hardware store where Laura had worked changed owners. The neighborhood changed. The old houses remained. But the people who remembered October 18, 1981, grew older. The murder became one of those stories whispered whenever someone mentioned the town's darkest history. A young woman. A locked house. An unidentified fingerprint. No killer. No confession. No explanation. For decades, that was where the story ended. But it was not where the evidence ended. Because inside a county evidence room, sealed in a cardboard box, there was still one small envelope. Inside that envelope was a fingerprint. And 31 years later, someone would finally have the technology to ask the question investigators in 1981 could not. Who left it there? Part 2. For 31 years, the fingerprint remained anonymous. The murder did not. It followed Laura Bennett's family through every stage of their lives. Her mother, Evelyn, never moved from Bellwether. She kept Laura's bedroom almost exactly as it had been. The curtains remained. The bookshelf remained. Even an old pair of shoes stayed beneath the bed. Evelyn once told a reporter that keeping the room unchanged was not about refusing to accept Laura's death. It was about refusing to let the world forget that Laura had existed. But the world moved on. By 1990, the murder had disappeared from most newspapers. By 2000, younger police officers knew Laura's name only because her case was listed among the department's unsolved homicides. By 2010, the original detectives were retired. One had died. Another lived in Arizona. The third refused interviews. Then, in early 2012, the Bellwether Sheriff's Department received funding for a cold case review program. Detective Sarah Coleman was assigned to examine old homicide files. She was 39 years old. Laura Bennett had been dead longer than Coleman had been alive. The file arrived in a box. Brown paper. Faded ink. A handwritten number. Inside were photographs, witness statements, newspaper clippings, laboratory notes, and evidence logs. Coleman began reading. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then she reached the fingerprint report. Partial latent print. Recovered from refrigerator door. Unknown source. Insufficient comparison. Preserved. Coleman stopped. She looked at the date. October 18th, 1981. Then she looked at the evidence inventory. The original print had survived. That was rare. Many old cases had been damaged by water, poor storage, or careless handling. But this one had remained sealed. Coleman requested the envelope. The evidence technician brought it to her. She opened the old box. Inside was a transparent sleeve. The fingerprint was faint, but visible. Coleman stared at it. The ridges looked like tiny rivers frozen in time. 31 years had passed. The person who left that print could have been anywhere. Could have been dead. Could have been living under another name. Could have been sitting in a house only miles away. Coleman sent the print to the State Forensic Laboratory. The request was simple. Digitize it. Enhance it. Run it through every available database. Days passed. Then weeks. Finally, the laboratory called. There was no match. But there was something else. The print contained enough ridge detail to be considered potentially valuable. It was not a full fingerprint. It was a partial. But modern software could extract more information than investigators had been able to obtain in 1981. Coleman reopened the witness files. One name appeared repeatedly. Michael Ross. Laura's former boyfriend. He had been questioned. He had been cleared. But Coleman noticed something the original detectives had not emphasized. Michael had told investigators he had not spoken to Laura for 6 weeks. A coworker had told police Laura had mentioned seeing him only 4 days before the murder. That contradiction had never been fully resolved. Coleman found Michael. He was living in Nevada. He was 58. Married. Working as a construction supervisor. When Coleman contacted him, he immediately remembered Laura. He also remembered the investigation. He agreed to provide a fingerprint. The laboratory compared it. No match. Michael was eliminated. Coleman continued. Then she found another name. Stephen Hall. The mechanic. He was still alive. He was living in Oregon. Again, no match. The case appeared to be returning to the same dead end. Until Coleman noticed something buried in the original evidence log. A second fingerprint had been recovered. Not from the refrigerator. From the underside of a kitchen chair. The print had been classified as unusable. No further analysis had been attempted. Coleman requested the evidence. The technician found it. Barely visible. But there. Coleman sent both prints to the laboratory. The results were unexpected. The refrigerator print and the chair print were likely from the same person. The killer had touched 2 separate objects. 2 locations. 1 unknown individual. That meant the evidence was stronger than investigators had realized. The case now had a fingerprint belonging to someone who had apparently moved through Laura's kitchen. And for the first time in 31 years, technology could search beyond the suspects police had originally considered. Coleman submitted the print to the national database. She waited. There was no immediate hit. No name appeared. But several days later, a notification arrived. The system had generated a possible candidate. The name was Daniel Mercer. Coleman froze. Daniel Mercer. The first patrolman to enter Laura's house. The man who had photographed the scene. The man who had handled the refrigerator. The man whose report appeared on the first page of the original file. Coleman requested his personnel records. Mercer had died in 2004. But his fingerprints were archived because he had worked as a police officer. The laboratory ran the comparison. The refrigerator print was not Mercer. The system had produced a false candidate. The case went cold again. But something had changed. Coleman now knew the print could be searched. She knew it belonged to someone whose identity might exist somewhere in a modern database. The question was no longer whether the fingerprint could speak. The question was whether anyone was listening. And then, 3 months into the investigation, another hit appeared. This time, the name was not familiar. It belonged to a man living less than 50 miles from Bellwether, a man who had never appeared in the original case file. His name was Thomas Reed. Part 3. Thomas Reed was 62 years old when his name appeared in the system. He lived quietly. He had no public profile, no newspaper articles, no connection to Bellwether that immediately stood out. He had worked as a truck driver. He had been married twice. He had 2 adult children. And according to the database, he had been fingerprinted in 1987 following a burglary arrest. The arrest had never resulted in a major conviction. The charge was reduced. Reed disappeared from law enforcement records after that. But his fingerprints remained. When the laboratory compared his print with the partial recovered from Laura's refrigerator, the result was not definitive. It was a possible match. That distinction mattered. A possible match was not proof. Coleman needed more. She began building Reed's timeline. In 1981, he had been 31. He lived in another California town. He worked irregular jobs. And according to one old employment record, he had occasionally driven delivery routes through Bellwether. The route ran directly past Alder Street. That alone meant nothing. Thousands of people drove through Bellwether. But Coleman discovered something else. Reed had once worked for a company that delivered appliances. The Bennett house had received a refrigerator repair approximately 3 weeks before Laura's death. The original report had mentioned a service technician, but the technician's name was missing. Coleman searched company records. The business no longer existed. She contacted a former employee. The employee remembered Reed. He knew that neighborhood, the man said. Coleman asked whether Reed had ever worked at the Bennett residence. The man could not remember. But he remembered something else. Reed had been fired in late 1981. The reason? Repeated complaints about entering homes without authorization. Coleman felt the case tighten. Not enough for an arrest. Not enough for a warrant. But enough to keep digging. She visited Reed's home. He answered the door. He looked older than his photograph. His hands shook slightly. Coleman introduced herself. When she said Laura Bennett's name, his expression changed. Only for a second. But she noticed. "Do you remember her?" Reed stared at the floor. Then he said yes. That was the first moment the case truly came alive. He claimed he had met Laura only once, during a refrigerator repair. He said he remembered the house. He remembered the kitchen. He remembered the rain. Coleman did not tell him that the murder had occurred during a storm. He volunteered it. That detail had never appeared in the public reports. Coleman asked how he knew. Reed shrugged. People talked. But Coleman knew the weather information had not been included in the original public articles. She left without arresting him. Back at the station, she reviewed the interview. One phrase stood out. Reed had said, "I never went back there." Coleman had never asked whether he had gone back. That sentence had come from him. The next step was surveillance. Investigators watched Reed for several weeks. Nothing unusual. He went to work. He visited a grocery store. He attended church. He lived an ordinary life. Then detectives learned something disturbing. Reed had changed his name in 1996. Not legally. Informally. He had begun using his middle name. Why? He claimed it was because people frequently mispronounced Thomas. But investigators found no obvious reason. Coleman returned to the evidence. She compared Reed's known fingerprints with the recovered prints. The laboratory eventually concluded that the refrigerator print could not be excluded as Reed's. The chair print was also consistent. But there was another problem. Reed's fingerprint pattern had changed slightly due to age and injury. His right index finger showed an old scar. The refrigerator print appeared to have been made by that finger. Coleman needed a stronger connection. She obtained a search warrant for Reed's old employment records. Inside a forgotten personnel archive was a handwritten note from 1981. Employee absent without explanation, October 19th. The day after Laura's murder. Then came another discovery. A former supervisor remembered Reed requesting a route change immediately after the murder. The request had been denied. He quit 2 weeks later. Still, investigators could not prove he had killed Laura. A fingerprint inside a house did not establish when it was left. Reed had legitimate reason to have been there. He had repaired the refrigerator. His print could have been months old. Coleman understood that. She needed to determine whether Reed's presence on the night of the murder could be established. That search led her into the old telephone records. Laura had made one call at 11:42 p.m. The number was disconnected years ago, but investigators traced it. It belonged to a payphone outside a gas station. The station's owner had died. The building had been demolished. Yet one archive surveillance record existed. Not video. A handwritten log. At 11:50 p.m., an employee had recorded a vehicle parked near the payphone. Dark blue pickup. California plate. Partial number. Coleman compared the plate information with vehicles registered to Reed in 1981. One matched. A dark blue pickup. The case was no longer just a fingerprint. It was a timeline. Laura called a payphone. A dark blue pickup appeared nearby. Reed owned a matching vehicle, and his fingerprint was inside her kitchen. But one final question remained. Why would he kill her? Coleman searched deeper into Laura's personal life, and she found something the original investigators had missed. 3 days before her death, Laura had reported seeing a stranger near her home. She had told her sister that someone had been following her. Her sister remembered the conversation, but police had never documented it. Now Coleman wondered whether Laura had known her killer, or whether the killer had known something Laura had discovered. Then, inside an old box belonging to Laura's mother, investigators found a photograph. It showed Laura standing outside the hardware store. Behind her, partially obscured by a delivery truck, was a man. The photograph had been taken 1 week before the murder. The man's face was unclear, but he was wearing the same dark jacket described by the neighbor, and on his left hand was a distinctive ring. Coleman enlarged the image. Reed had worn a ring like that. The case had just become personal. Part 4. The photograph was never enough to identify Thomas Reed. The image was grainy. The man's face was partially hidden. The ring was common, but the discovery changed how investigators viewed Laura's final week. She had not been living in fear. She had been watching someone. Someone had been watching her. Her sister, Rachel, was interviewed again. She was 23 when Laura died. Now she was 54. For 31 years, she had carried one memory. Laura calling her late at night. Her voice low. Her words uncertain. I think someone is following me. Rachel had assumed it was nothing. Laura had always been cautious. She had probably seen the same stranger twice. Maybe a customer from the hardware store. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe no one. But after Laura died, Rachel realized there had been fear in her sister's voice. Investigators asked why she had never mentioned it before. Rachel began crying. Because I didn't think it mattered. That sentence became one of the most painful lines in the reopened investigation. Because cold cases are often built from things people once believed were insignificant. A glance. A phone call. A receipt. A fingerprint. A sentence spoken and forgotten. Coleman asked Rachel whether Laura had ever mentioned Thomas Reed. She said no. But she remembered the refrigerator repair. Laura had complained about the technician. Not because he had done poor work. Because he had asked unusual questions. Whether she lived alone. Whether she worked late. Whether anyone else had a key. At the time, Laura had laughed about it. She thought he was simply making conversation. Now the questions sounded different. Investigators located the original repair invoice. It confirmed that Reed had serviced the refrigerator. The date was September 27, 1981. 3 weeks before the murder. That meant his fingerprint could have been legitimately left inside the house. The evidence seemed strong. Then it weakened. Investigators examined the refrigerator. The original print had been recovered near the handle. A place anyone could touch. If Reed had repaired the appliance, his fingerprint was not surprising. The case appeared to collapse again. But Coleman noticed something about the chair print. It had been found on the underside of the chair. Not on the back. Not on the seat. Underneath. A place a repair technician would have no reason to touch. That print was more significant. The laboratory re-examined it. The ridge detail was limited, but enough survived to compare. The print was consistent with Reed. Still not conclusive. Then investigators found something else. Laura's fingernails had been examined in 1981. The report mentioned trace material, but the original laboratory had not performed modern DNA testing. The samples had been preserved for 31 years. The state laboratory tested them. The result was partial DNA from an unknown male. Not enough for a full profile, but enough for comparison. Investigators collected a lawful DNA sample from Reed. The result came back. No match. For the first time, the case appeared to turn away from him. The fingerprint could be coincidental. The vehicle could be coincidental. The photograph could be misleading. The repair could explain his presence. The DNA excluded him. Coleman refused to close the file. Instead, she asked a different question. If Reed was not the killer, whose DNA was on Laura? The sample was uploaded to the available database. No match. But it revealed something unexpected. The unknown male profile appeared to contain a rare genetic characteristic. Investigators began looking at relatives of known offenders. One name emerged. Frank Danner. Danner had been arrested in California in 1984 for burglary. He had died in prison in 1999. His DNA was already in the database. His profile did not match. But one of his relatives did. His younger brother, Robert Danner. Robert was alive. He lived in Oregon. He had never been investigated in Laura's case. But his DNA was statistically close enough to suggest a familial relationship. Coleman traveled north. Robert Danner was 67. When investigators showed him Laura's photograph, he said he did not know her. Then they showed him a photograph of the Bennett house. He became silent. "You've been there," Coleman said. "No." "You know this house." "I've seen it." "Where?" Danner looked away. Finally, he said he had worked with his brother in Bellwether. In 1981, he admitted being in the neighborhood, but he denied entering Laura's home. Then investigators asked about the night of October 18th. Danner claimed he was at home. His wife had been alive at the time, but she had died in 2003. There was no independent confirmation. The investigation now had a new suspect. A man whose DNA was related to the unknown male sample. A man who had been in Bellwether. A man whose brother had a criminal history. But again, there was no proof. Then Coleman discovered the strangest detail yet. Robert Danner had once owned a dark blue pickup, the same color as the vehicle seen near the pay phone. The vehicle had been sold in November 1981, just weeks after Laura's murder. Suddenly, The old handwritten gas station log mattered. Coleman requested the original. The partial license plate was barely legible, but it contained 4 characters. Investigators reconstructed the plate. It matched Danner's truck. The case had changed again. The fingerprint had pointed toward Reed. The DNA pointed toward the Danner family. The vehicle pointed toward Robert Danner. And somewhere between those clues was the truth. Part 5. Robert Danner agreed to another interview. This time, investigators brought photographs from 1981. The gas station. Alder Street. Laura's house. The hardware store. Danner stared at each photograph. He remained silent for almost 10 minutes. Then he pointed at one. The kitchen window. That wasn't there. Coleman leaned forward. What wasn't there? The curtain. She checked the original photograph. The curtain was visible. Danner had just revealed that he knew the interior layout of Laura's house. Not simply the street. Not the neighborhood. The house itself. Coleman asked how. Danner said he had seen it during a delivery. But investigators knew he had never worked for the appliance company. His brother had. Not him. Danner corrected himself. He said his brother had shown him the house. That explanation created another problem. Why would his brother show him a customer's home? Investigators reopened every record connected to Frank Danner. Frank had been questioned in 1984 after a burglary. His fingerprints were taken. His vehicle records were preserved. And his employment history showed he had occasionally worked as a handyman. One address on his old job list was missing from the original case. The Bennett house. Frank had performed a repair there. But when? Investigators checked the date. October 12, 1981. 6 days before Laura died. The repair involved a kitchen cabinet. That meant Frank Danner had also been inside the house. His fingerprints were compared. The refrigerator print did not match. The chair print did not match. But investigators discovered something else. Frank had a younger brother, Robert. And the two men sometimes worked together. The case became a family mystery. Could Robert have entered the house while Frank's fingerprints remained from the repair? Could the DNA belong to Robert? Could the fingerprint belong to another person? Or were investigators chasing coincidences created by 3 decades of incomplete records? The laboratory performed advanced familial analysis. The unknown DNA was consistent with Robert Danner being a close relative of the source. But it could not establish that Robert himself was the source. The distinction was critical. Coleman returned to Bellwether. She spoke with retired residents. One elderly man remembered seeing a dark pickup near Laura's home. Another remembered hearing an argument. A third remembered a man knocking on Laura's door. The descriptions differed. But one detail repeated. The man was wearing a work jacket. Coleman searched photographs of Frank Danner. He wore work jackets. So did Robert. So did thousands of men. The investigation seemed trapped in ambiguity. Then came the breakthrough. A retired telephone technician contacted the department. He had seen the news about the reopened case. He remembered something from 1981. The payphone near the gas station had been serviced the morning after Laura's murder. The technician had found something unusual. A small smear of blood. It had been wiped away. At the time, he assumed it came from someone with a cut. But the technician had kept his handwritten service notes. The notes mentioned a torn piece of fabric caught inside the phone housing. The fabric had been discarded. Except it had not. The technician remembered giving it to a gas station employee. That employee had died years earlier. His son still lived in town. When contacted, the son said his father had kept old objects in a box. The box was found in a garage. Inside was a small paper envelope. The fabric was still there. It was badly degraded, but modern testing recovered microscopic biological material. Investigators tested it. The DNA profile matched the unknown male DNA recovered from Laura. The killer had used the payphone. The killer had injured himself. The blood had remained on the phone. And now investigators had a second sample from the same unknown man. The question was whether the DNA could finally identify him. It did not match Robert Danner. It did not match Thomas Reed. It did not match Frank Danner. The killer was still unknown. But investigators now knew something critical. The man had been bleeding shortly before Laura's death. And he had left the phone around midnight. Laura had made a call from that same phone only minutes earlier. That suggested the killer and Laura may have been at the gas station at nearly the same time. Investigators reconstructed the timeline. 11:42 p.m. Laura calls the payphone. 11:50 p.m. Dark blue pickup scene nearby. 11:55 p.m. A man enters the gas station. Midnight. The man leaves. 12:15 a.m. A vehicle is seen heading toward Alder Street. 2:17 a.m. Laura is found dead. The distance between the gas station and Laura's home was less than 10 minutes by car. The killer had time. But why had Laura called the payphone? There was no record of the number she dialed. The original telephone system had lost the destination data. Only the call itself remained. Coleman wondered whether Laura had been calling someone who did not want the call traced. Someone who used a payphone. Someone who knew she was watching him. Then Rachel remembered something. Laura had once told her that if anything happened, she should check the kitchen cabinet. Investigators had searched that cabinet in 1981. They found nothing. But 31 years later, they searched again. Behind a loose wooden panel was a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. Only one sentence. I know who he is. No name. No explanation. No date. And no indication whether Laura had written it herself. But the handwriting appeared to be hers. The mystery had just become darker. Laura may have known her killer. And she may have been preparing to expose him. Part 6. The note changed the case overnight. For decades, investigators had treated Laura's murder as a crime without motive. Now there was evidence that Laura had been investigating someone before she died. The question became obvious. Who? Investigators searched her workplace. They found an old desk calendar. Several dates had been circled. One date was October 19th, the day after her death. Beside it were two initials. R.D. Coleman stared at them. Robert Danner. It was possible, but not certain. The initials could belong to anyone. Investigators interviewed Laura's former coworkers again. One woman remembered Laura asking questions about company deliveries. Another remembered Laura looking through public records. A third said Laura had been worried about someone using false names. That led investigators into a completely different direction. Laura had discovered irregularities involving a local contractor. Payments. Invoices. Missing equipment. A name appeared repeatedly. Richard Doyle. Doyle owned a small construction company. He had hired temporary workers. One of those workers had been Robert Danner. But Doyle denied knowing Laura personally. Then investigators found a payment made to Doyle's company 2 weeks before the murder. The payment came from a business connected to the hardware store. Nothing illegal. Nothing suspicious. Until investigators discovered Laura had flagged the transaction. She believed money was being diverted. If she had discovered financial fraud, she might have had a motive for exposing someone. But there was still no proof that the fraud was connected to her death. Investigators searched Doyle's history. He had died in 1993. His records were incomplete. His family refused interviews. The case appeared to be expanding in every direction. Then the laboratory contacted Coleman. The DNA from the payphone had been entered into a genealogical database through a forensic family tree investigation. A distant relative had been identified. The relative's family tree contained a branch leading to a man named Arthur Kane. Kane had died in 2007. He had never been arrested, but he had lived in Bellwether in 1981. And he had worked at the same hardware store as Laura. That discovery stunned investigators. Arthur Kane had been Laura's co-worker. His name appeared in the original witness statements. He had told police that he left work at 5:30 p.m. on the day of the murder. He claimed he went directly home, but no one had verified it. Kane had died before the case reopened. There was no interview, no confession, but his daughter agreed to provide DNA. The result was astonishing. The unknown male DNA recovered from the phone was highly consistent with being inherited from Kane's family. Not conclusive, but stronger than any previous lead. Investigators searched Kane's old belongings. His daughter remembered a box of work clothes. Inside was a dark jacket. The jacket was photographed. The family had kept it for decades. Investigators tested it. No usable DNA. But one pocket contained an old gas station receipt. October 18th, 1981. 11:47 p.m. The receipt was from the exact gas station near the payphone. Kane had claimed he went home after work. The receipt proved otherwise. For the first time, investigators had a suspect whose timeline directly contradicted his original statement. And then came another detail. Kane's vehicle in 1981 was a dark blue pickup. The same color. The same gas station. The same night. The same approximate time. Investigators compared the partial license plate from the handwritten log. It matched Kane's vehicle. Robert Danner was eliminated. Thomas Reed was eliminated. The Danner theory collapsed. Arthur Kane became the central suspect. But Kane was dead. There could be no arrest. No interrogation. No courtroom. Only evidence. Investigators returned to the fingerprint. Kane's fingerprints had been taken during employment processing in 1979. The refrigerator print was compared. No match. But the chair print? The laboratory requested more time. After weeks of analysis, the result came back. The chair print was consistent with Kane. It was not an absolute identification because the print was incomplete, but the probability was extremely high. Then investigators examined the original scene photographs. One photograph showed the kitchen chair. The chair had been moved away from the table. Laura had apparently been sitting there shortly before the attack. The fingerprint had been left underneath. That suggested the killer had gripped the chair. Perhaps he had pulled it away. Perhaps he had moved it while confronting Laura. Perhaps the print had been left during the struggle. The case was finally forming a coherent picture. Laura had discovered something. She had written that she knew who he was. She called from a payphone. Arthur Kane appeared at the same location. He drove a dark blue pickup. His blood was found on the phone. His DNA was linked to the unknown male profile. His fingerprint was found beneath Laura's kitchen chair. And his original timeline was false. But one question remained. Why had Arthur Kane killed Laura? Part 7. The motive was hidden inside the hardware store. Investigators discovered that Laura had been auditing company accounts. She was not a police officer. She was not a detective. She was a bookkeeper. But she had noticed numbers that did not make sense. Inventory disappeared. Invoices were altered. Payments were made to shell companies. And several of those companies were connected to employees. Arthur Kane was one of them. He had been receiving payments for repair work that investigators could not verify. The amounts were small, too small to trigger alarms. But over several years, they added up. Laura had begun documenting the discrepancies. A folder was missing from her workplace after her death. The folder had never been found, but a carbon copy remained. The documents showed Kane had received unauthorized payments. Laura had marked several transactions with red ink. Beside one entry, she had written, "Ask Arthur." Then, 3 days before her murder, she wrote, "He knows I found it." That sentence changed everything. Laura had not simply suspected someone. She believed that person knew she had discovered the financial scheme. Investigators reconstructed the final week. Laura confronted Kane at work. They argued. Co-workers heard raised voices. Kane left. Laura told her sister she was being followed. 2 days later, she called the payphone. The night of October 18th, Kane went to the same gas station. He was bleeding. He drove toward Alder Street. Laura's house showed no forced entry. She may have opened the door for someone she knew. Kane's fingerprint appeared inside. His DNA was connected to the blood. His vehicle matched the witness description. His original alibi was false, and the note in Laura's cabinet suggested she had identified him. Still, investigators faced a devastating problem. Arthur Kane was dead. He had suffered a heart attack in 2007. His death certificate listed natural causes. His family said he had never confessed to anything. But one family member remembered something strange. Kane had kept a small notebook. After his death, the notebook was thrown into a storage box. The daughter searched for it. She found it beneath old tax records. The notebook contained names, dates, amounts. Most entries related to work. But one page was different. It contained only a date. October 18th, 1981. Underneath, Elbe. Then a sentence. She would not listen. The handwriting was Kane's. The daughter gave the notebook to investigators. It was not a confession, but it was the strongest piece of evidence yet. Investigators examined the paper. The ink was consistent with the early 1980s. The page had not been added later. The initials matched Laura Bennett, and the phrase suggested a confrontation. The question became whether Kane had planned to kill Laura, or whether the confrontation escalated unexpectedly. The evidence suggested the latter. There was no indication of a sophisticated plan. No evidence of disguise. No attempt to destroy the house. No attempt to hide the body. He appeared to have entered the house, confronted Laura, and killed her. Then he left. The refrigerator fingerprint was possibly left during his earlier legitimate visit. The chair fingerprint was more likely connected to the murder. The blood on the payphone suggested he had injured himself during the sequence of events. But investigators still could not explain why Laura called the payphone. Then they found the answer. The number belonged to Arthur Kane's workplace. Laura had called the payphone and asked for him. The station employee had remembered seeing Kane arrive shortly afterward. The call had been a meeting request. Laura wanted to confront him. She believed she had evidence. Kane agreed to meet. And after the meeting, something happened. Investigators reconstructed the most likely sequence. Laura met Kane at the gas station. They argued. Kane cut his hand on something. Laura left. Kane followed. She returned home. He arrived minutes later. Laura opened the door. She knew him. The confrontation continued inside. The chair moved. Laura fought. Kane killed her. Then he left. The theory was powerful, but it still depended on inference. There was no surviving eyewitness. No murder weapon. No confession. No complete fingerprint. No video. Only fragments. For 31 years, those fragments had existed separately. Now investigators had connected them. But a final discovery would make the case even more disturbing. Inside Kane's old garage, his family found a toolbox. At the bottom was a kitchen knife. The blade had been sharpened repeatedly. The knife had no obvious blood. Modern testing found nothing usable. But the knife's handle contained an old fingerprint. Investigators compared it. The print was consistent with Kane. That proved only ownership or handling, not murder. Still, the evidence was now overwhelming in its pattern. And the town of Bellwether finally began to understand something terrifying. The killer had never truly disappeared. He had lived among them, worked among them, driven the same streets, gone to the same stores. And for decades, the people of Bellwether had unknowingly shared their community with the man who had taken Laura Bennett's life. Part 8. The investigation did not end with the discovery of Arthur Kane's notebook. It became more complicated, because when prosecutors reviewed the evidence, they warned investigators that suspicion was not the same as proof. A dead suspect could not defend himself. A courtroom could not question him. The evidence had to stand alone. The fingerprint had to be reliable. The DNA had to be scientifically valid. The notebook had to be authenticated. The vehicle record had to be confirmed. The gas station receipt had to be genuine. Every piece had to survive scrutiny. Forensic specialists re-examined the fingerprint. They determined that the chair print contained enough ridge characteristics to support an identification consistent with Kane. Not absolute, but strong. The DNA recovered from the payphone was also re-examined. The laboratory confirmed that the profile was male. It was consistent with Kane's biological relatives. But because Kane's own DNA had not been collected before his death, investigators could not claim a direct match. That limitation remained. Still, the evidence was converging. Then came the most important discovery. A retired detective found an old photograph that had never been included in the official case file. It showed the kitchen after the body had been removed. On the refrigerator was a small handwritten mark made by the original crime scene technician. An arrow. Beside it, fresh print. That single word changed the interpretation. The original technician had believed the fingerprint looked fresh. Why? Because the surface around it had been wiped clean. The print appeared sharper than older household prints. That observation had never made it into the final report, but the photograph preserved it. Investigators now believe the refrigerator print may have been left during the murder. That strengthened the connection to Kane. But there was still a problem. If Kane had previously repaired the refrigerator, his fingerprint could already have been there. The original technician's observations suggested otherwise, but could not prove it. The case remained just beyond the threshold of certainty. Then Rachel Bennett came forward with another memory. She had kept an old answering machine tape. She had forgotten about it. The tape had been recorded 3 days before Laura's death. Laura had called her. The message was short. Her voice sounded frightened. She said, "Rachel, if Arthur comes here again, don't let him in." Investigators digitized the recording. The voice was unmistakably Laura's. It was the first direct evidence that Laura feared Kane specifically. The statement did not prove he killed her, but it established motive and fear. Laura knew him. She was afraid of him, and she expected him to come back. The case now contained a disturbing progression. First, Laura discovered financial irregularities. Then she confronted Kane. Then she told her sister he was following her. Then she warned her sister not to let him into the house. Then, on the night of the murder, Kane appeared at the gas station. He followed her home. And Laura was killed. For investigators, the sequence was devastating. But there was still no answer to one question. What happened between Laura and Kane at the gas station? The answer came from an unlikely source. A mechanic who worked near the station had kept a notebook of vehicles he serviced. He remembered Kane's truck. He remembered seeing Laura standing beside it. They were arguing. The mechanic did not know what they were saying. But he remembered Laura holding something. A folder. She appeared to be showing Kane documents. Then Kane grabbed the folder. Laura pulled it back. The mechanic looked away. When he looked again, Laura was walking toward the payphone. Kane was standing beside his truck. Minutes later, the dark blue pickup left. That meant Laura had confronted Kane before returning home. She had brought evidence. She had tried to force him to explain. And somehow, the confrontation moved from the gas station to her house. The mechanic could not remember whether Kane followed her. But the timing suggested it. Investigators reconstructed the distance. 7 minutes. That was all Kane needed. 7 minutes from the gas station to Alder Street. The original 1981 investigators had never known that Laura and Kane were together that night. They had never known about the financial records. They had never known about the fear. They had never known about the note. They had never known about the notebook. They had never known that the blood on the payphone belonged to the same, unknown man later linked to Kane's family. 31 years had separated the murder from the breakthrough. And yet the evidence had been waiting. In boxes. In garages. In forgotten drawers. In handwritten notes. In old photographs. The truth had not disappeared. It had simply been scattered. Now investigators began putting it back together. Part 9. By the time the case was presented to the district attorney, the story was clear enough to be frightening. But prosecutors still refused to call it solved. They called it exceptionally strong circumstantial evidence. That phrase mattered. Because a murder case is not solved simply because investigators believe they know what happened. It must be proven. And Arthur Kane could never stand trial. His family reacted differently. Some refused to believe it. Others said they had suspected something for years. One relative remembered Kane becoming unusually withdrawn after 1981. Another remembered him burning papers. A third remembered him telling someone, "Sometimes you have to live with what you've done." No one knew what he meant. Now those words seemed darker. Investigators searched Kane's surviving possessions. They found no confession, no murder weapon, no photograph, no letter. Nothing that said, plainly, "I killed Laura Bennett." But they found something else. A receipt from a hardware store. Dated October 19th, 1981. The morning after Laura's murder. Kane had purchased cleaning supplies. Bleach. Gloves. A replacement work shirt. The items were ordinary. But investigators examined his employment records. Kane normally purchased supplies through the company. That morning, he paid cash. The receipt was small. Almost meaningless. But the timing was impossible to ignore. The investigators wondered whether he had attempted to remove traces of blood from his hands or clothing. There was no way to prove it. Still, the pattern continued. The evidence did not scream. It accumulated. One detail. Then another. Then another. A fingerprint. A receipt. A vehicle. A phone call. A bloodstain. A note. A notebook. A warning. A false alibi. The case had become a chain, and every link pointed toward the same man. Then came the final forensic review. Investigators discovered that the blood on the payphone had been deposited through a small tear in the fabric. The fabric belonged to a work jacket. Kane had owned several. His daughter remembered one jacket missing after 1981. She had never known why. Investigators found an old photograph showing Kane wearing a similar jacket. On the sleeve was a small tear. The photograph had been taken in 1980. The tear's location corresponded with the fragment recovered from the phone. Again, not proof, but another coincidence. Too many coincidences. 31 years after the murder, the department officially announced that Arthur Kane was the primary suspect. The announcement shocked Bellwether. Many residents remembered him. Some had worked with him. Some had bought tools from him. Some had seen him at the grocery store. He had been an ordinary man. That was the most disturbing part. There had been no monster hiding in a basement. No obvious criminal. No wanted poster. Just a quiet employee who had gone to work, driven a truck, attended family gatherings, and lived an ordinary life after a young woman was murdered. Laura's sister Rachel heard the announcement from her home. She sat in silence. Then she looked at a photograph of Laura. For decades, she had wondered whether they would ever know. Now they did. But knowing was not the same as justice. Rachel later said the hardest part was realizing that Kane had died peacefully. Laura had not. That difference could never be repaired. The case was formally classified as solved by investigators. But because Kane was dead, there was no prosecution. No trial. No sentence. No final courtroom confession. Only a conclusion. And for some people, that was enough. For others, it was not. The most haunting question remained unanswered. What exactly happened inside Laura's kitchen? Investigators believed Kane confronted her. They believed an argument became violent. They believed the chair was moved during the struggle. They believed Laura resisted. They believed Kane fled. But no one knew the precise final minutes. No witness had seen them. No recording survived. The kitchen had kept it secret for 31 years. And perhaps it would keep it forever. Part 10. The Bennett house was demolished in 2015. The city had planned to widen the road. The property had been vacant for years. Before demolition, investigators returned one final time. The kitchen was gone. The refrigerator was gone. The chair was gone. Only walls remained. Detective Sarah Coleman stood inside the empty structure. She imagined Laura there. 27 years old. Alive. Working. Planning the future. Never knowing that the ordinary kitchen around her would become the center of a mystery lasting 3 decades. Coleman later said the hardest part of cold case work was understanding how quickly a person's life could become a collection of evidence. A photograph. A fingerprint. A receipt. A police report. A name. But Laura had been more than that. She had been someone's daughter. Someone's sister. Someone's friend. Someone who had plans for Sunday. That Sunday never came. The investigation eventually closed. Arthur Kane remained the primary suspect. The evidence was archived. The fingerprint was preserved. And Laura's family finally received the answer they had spent decades waiting for. Not perfect certainty, but something close. Then, unexpectedly, another piece surfaced. A former employee of the hardware store found an old cassette tape. It had been recorded during a company meeting in 1981. The audio was poor. Voices overlapped. Paper moved. Chairs scraped. But one conversation could be heard. Laura's voice. Then Kane's. Laura accused him of taking money. Kane denied it. Laura said she had copies of the records. Kane told her to stop. Then the recording ended. It was the closest thing to a direct confrontation between the two. The tape did not contain a confession, but it confirmed motive. Kane knew Laura had evidence. He knew she intended to expose him, and he had threatened her. Investigators compared the voice to other recordings. It was Kane. There was no longer any reasonable doubt that he and Laura had been in conflict. The case became one of those rare investigations in which time had not erased the evidence. Time had preserved it. Technology had uncovered it. People had remembered fragments. And slowly, the fragments formed a picture. The fingerprint that had once seemed useless became meaningful. The DNA that had once seemed unrelated became connected. The forgotten receipt became a timeline. The gas station log became a location. The note became a warning. The notebook became a confession without the word confession. But perhaps the most powerful evidence was still Laura's own voice. "I know who he is." She had written it. She had said his name. She had warned her sister. She had tried to protect herself. And she had died anyway. In 2016, the department placed Laura's case file into a permanent archive. The box contained everything. Photographs. Reports. Fingerprints. DNA results. The notebook. The tape. The original envelope. A small label was placed on the outside. Bennett, Laura, homicide, solved by evidence review. But inside the box was something more personal. A photograph of Laura. Her family had given it to investigators. On the back was written, "Remember her." That became the unofficial final message of the case. Not remember the killer. Remember Laura. Because cold cases can become obsessed with the person who committed the crime. The killer's face. The killer's motive. The killer's final days. But behind every file is a victim whose life was interrupted. Laura never received a chance to grow older. She never saw the world change. She never saw computers transform investigations. She never knew that the fingerprint left behind in her kitchen would survive long enough to become useful. She never knew investigators would eventually reconstruct the last hours of her life. But the evidence waited. 31 years. It waited. Part 11. In the end, the most chilling thing about Laura Bennett's murder was not that the killer disappeared. It was that he did not. He stayed. He lived. He worked. He grew old. He watched the years pass. And somewhere inside his life was the memory of a night that everyone else had forgotten. Except the evidence. The fingerprint remained. The old paper remained. The photograph remained. The gas station record remained. Laura's voice remained. The case was never truly silent. It was only waiting for someone to listen. For decades, investigators believed the murder had no direction. No suspect. No motive. No path forward. But the evidence had always been there. The problem was that the technology was not. In 1981, a partial fingerprint could sit inside an evidence envelope and become almost meaningless. In 2012, the same print could be digitized, compared, re-examined, connected. The difference was 31 years. 31 years between a mystery and an answer. 31 years between a fingerprint and a name. 31 years between a family asking, "Who did this?" and investigators finally saying, "We believe we know." There would never be a trial. Arthur Kane would never sit before a judge. He would never hear the evidence. He would never face Laura's family. He would never explain the note. He would never explain the blood. He would never explain why he went to the gas station. He would never explain why he followed Laura. And he would never explain what happened inside that kitchen. That silence belongs to him. But the evidence speaks loudly enough. Laura knew him. She feared him. She confronted him. She documented him. And on the night she died, his presence appeared again and again in the surviving trail of evidence. The old fingerprint became the symbol of the entire case. A tiny pattern. A few lines. A few ridges. Something so small that investigators in 1981 could barely see its importance. But fingerprints are strange things. They are invisible histories. They reveal that a person touched something. They do not tell you why. They do not tell you what happened next. They simply say, "I was here." And in Laura Bennett's case, that was enough to reopen a story everyone thought was finished. The people of Bellwether eventually stopped talking about the murder every day. Children who had once gathered outside the police tape grew old. Businesses changed names. Roads changed. The gas station disappeared. The payphone was removed. The house on Alder Street was demolished. But Laura's name remained. Her sister kept the photograph. Her mother never stopped remembering. And the evidence box remained in the county archive. Somewhere inside was the original fingerprint. Still there. Still carrying the pattern left behind by a man who believed time would erase what he had done. It did not. Time changed the town. Time changed the investigators. Time changed the technology. Time changed the people. But it did not change the evidence. And that is the final cruelty of a cold case. A person can disappear. A witness can forget. A suspect can die. A building can be demolished. A newspaper can turn yellow. But sometimes one tiny piece survives. A fingerprint on a refrigerator. A drop of blood on a payphone. A receipt in an old notebook. A sentence written on paper. And when those fragments are finally placed together, the past can suddenly become present again. 31 years after Laura Bennett's death, her killer could no longer hide behind the passage of time. Not because someone finally confessed. Not because a witness suddenly remembered everything. Not because investigators discovered a dramatic hidden weapon. Because one old fingerprint had survived. It had waited inside an evidence envelope while the world moved on. It waited through 3 decades of silence. And when investigators finally looked at it again, the past opened. The lines became a pattern. The pattern became a comparison. The comparison became a name. And the name became the shadow hanging over a murder that had haunted California for 31 years. Laura never got to see that day. But her family did. They finally knew. Not everything. Not every second. Not every word. But enough. Enough to understand that she had not been forgotten. Enough to understand that the questions had not been pointless. Enough to understand that the night she died had left behind something the killer could never completely erase. A trace. A mark. A fingerprint. And sometimes, that is all history needs. Because the dead cannot speak. But evidence can. And after 31 years of silence, Laura Bennett's evidence finally spoke. The case should have ended there. The evidence had been reviewed. The suspect had been identified. The family had been given an explanation. The file had been marked solved. But cold cases rarely disappear completely. They remain in the background, waiting. Years after the investigation was considered closed, a new detective reviewing archive material noticed something that had escaped everyone before him. It was buried in the final evidence inventory. One line. Almost insignificant. Item 47, unidentified personal object recovered from residence. No photograph. No detailed description. No laboratory report. Just those words. The detective requested the box. The item was still there. A small metal key. Old. Darkened by age. Its original purpose was unknown. Investigators had apparently assumed it belonged to Laura. But there was a problem. Laura's known keys had been photographed at the scene. House key. Car key. Mailbox key. The metal key in item 47 was none of them. It was smaller. Almost like a locker key. The detective sent it for examination. The key contained no readable fingerprint, but microscopic residue remained inside the grooves. Modern forensic testing recovered traces of biological material. The sample was too degraded for a complete profile, but it contained enough information to indicate that the person who had handled the key was male. That alone changed nothing. Yet the detective looked at the original scene photographs again. He noticed something near the kitchen cabinet. A small metal lock. It was barely visible. The cabinet had a recessed compartment. A compartment nobody had documented in the original reports. The key fit. Inside was nothing. No documents. No money. No weapon. Only a shallow wooden space behind the cabinet. But the detective noticed scratches around the lock. Someone had opened it recently. Not during the modern investigation. Years earlier. Possibly in 1981. The discovery raised an unsettling possibility. Perhaps Laura had hidden something there. Perhaps the killer had searched for it. Perhaps both. The detective reviewed the financial documents again. One transaction remained unexplained. A payment made 3 days before Laura's death. The recipient was listed only by initials. Aka. Arthur Kane. The amount was modest, but the accompanying note was missing. Investigators searched the company's archived records. The original invoice was eventually found. The service description read, "Cabinet repair." The same cabinet. The same location. The same hidden compartment. Kane had not only worked inside Laura's house. He had repaired the cabinet where Laura later hid evidence. Suddenly, the old key became important. It might have belonged to Kane. Or Laura. Or someone else. There was no way to know. But investigators realized something even more disturbing. If Kane knew about the compartment, he would have known where Laura could hide documents. And if Laura had discovered his financial scheme, she may have used that compartment to conceal copies. The missing folder from the hardware store could have been inside. Perhaps Kane entered the house looking for it. Perhaps Laura refused to tell him where it was. Perhaps the confrontation became violent. The exact sequence would never be known. But the physical evidence suggested one thing. The killer may not have entered Laura's house simply to silence her. He may have entered to retrieve something. Something he believed could destroy him. That possibility changed the interpretation of the entire crime. The murder may have been the final act of a desperate attempt to erase evidence. But he failed. Because the evidence was never completely erased. The fingerprint survived. The note survived. The receipt survived. The tape survived. The notebook survived. Even the tiny key survived. And decades later, those fragments were enough to reconstruct a truth that had been hidden in plain sight. Laura Bennett had been trying to expose a secret. She had identified the person she feared. She had warned her sister. She had preserved evidence. And when that evidence became dangerous, someone came to her house. The killer believed the night would disappear. It did not. The night remained. Waiting inside boxes. Waiting inside photographs. Waiting inside forgotten recordings. Waiting inside the smallest details. 31 years passed. Then someone opened the evidence box. And the silence ended. The fingerprint was never merely a fingerprint. It was a message from the past. A quiet declaration from a crime scene that had been abandoned for decades. Someone touched this. Someone was here. And someone left something behind. That is why the oldest cold cases can sometimes become the most dangerous. Because time creates the illusion that the truth has disappeared. But evidence does not understand time. It simply waits. And in Laura Bennett's case, it waited 31 years before finally pointing toward the man investigators believe entered her home, confronted her, and ended her life. The town moved on. The streets changed. The house disappeared. The witnesses aged. The suspect died. But the fingerprint remained. And somewhere in that tiny pattern of ridges was the final piece of a story that had refused to die. A story that began with a ringing telephone at 2:17 in the morning. A story that ended decades later with a name. And a question that will remain forever unanswered. What did Laura Bennett say in the final moments before the room went silent? No recording survived. No witness heard it. No document preserved it. Only the evidence remains. And perhaps that is why the case continues to haunt Bellwether. Because investigators may know who they believe killed Laura. They may know why. They may know how the killer entered. They may know how he escaped. But they will never know her final words. The room is gone. The house is gone. The man is gone. Only the evidence remains. And after 31 years, it was finally enough to make the past impossible to ignore. The final words were never recovered. That silence became the last mystery surrounding Laura Bennett. Investigators could reconstruct the hours before her death. They could trace movements, identify vehicles, recover old records, and connect evidence that had remained separated for decades. But there was one moment no forensic test could ever restore. The moment when Laura realized she was no longer safe. The moment when the person standing inside her kitchen stopped being a threat and became a killer. Everything after that was silence. Yet the reopened investigation revealed that the silence had not begun inside the house. It had begun weeks earlier. Laura had started changing. Her coworkers noticed she was distracted. She stopped staying late at the hardware store. She began checking the parking lot before leaving. She asked one colleague whether the back entrance could be locked from the inside. She stopped walking to her car alone. At the time, none of it seemed extraordinary. People worried. People became cautious. People imagined threats that never materialized. But after Laura was murdered, those small changes became warnings that everyone wished they had taken seriously. One former coworker remembered a conversation from October 14th. Laura had been standing beside the accounting desk. She looked toward the front windows. Then she said quietly, "He's still watching me." The coworker asked who. Laura did not answer. She simply returned to work. For 31 years, that memory had remained buried. Now it became another piece of the timeline. Investigators returned to the hardware store. The building had changed ownership several times. The original accounting room no longer existed, but the basement did. Old shelving remained against the walls. Boxes had been stacked there for decades. Among them were payroll records, invoices, employee schedules, and handwritten delivery logs. A detective spent 2 weeks reviewing them. Then he found a page dated October 16, 1981. Arthur Kane's name appeared beside a delivery route. The route ended near Laura's neighborhood. Nothing unusual. Except Kane had not been scheduled to work that day. Someone had written his name in pencil after the schedule was completed. The handwriting belonged to the store manager. The manager was dead. But his son remembered something. His father had once told him that Kane had asked for Laura's address. The son had assumed it was for work. Now the details seemed chilling. Kane knew where Laura lived. He had been there before. He had repaired the cabinet. He had handled the refrigerator. He knew the layout. He knew she lived alone. And according to Laura's sister, Laura believed he was watching her. The investigation then uncovered a second warning. Laura had called the police 2 weeks before her murder. The call had never been treated as a formal complaint. She had asked whether officers could drive through her neighborhood because she believed a man was following her. An officer had passed through. He saw nothing. The call was never connected to the homicide. 31 years later, investigators found the dispatch record. The time was 10:13 p.m. The description was brief. Male, dark jacket, dark vehicle. There was no name. No arrest. No report. But the pattern was becoming impossible to dismiss. Laura had reported being followed. She had warned her sister. She had confronted Kane over missing money. She had written that she knew who he was. And on the night she died, Kane's vehicle appeared near the pay phone. The evidence was not one straight line. It was a web. And every strand seemed to lead back to the same man. Then came a discovery that investigators had not expected. Arthur Kane had a daughter. She was 11 years old in 1981. When detectives interviewed her decades later, she remembered the night of the murder. Her father had come home late. His hand was injured. She remembered blood on a towel. She remembered her mother asking what happened. Kane had said he cut himself while working. The daughter had never thought about it again. But the timing was exact. October 18th. The night Laura died. Investigators asked where Kane had been. The daughter said he did not explain. She remembered him washing his hands repeatedly, then throwing the towel away. The family had no reason to connect that behavior with murder, until investigators showed her the photograph of the bloodstained phone. She went silent. She later told investigators she wished she had remembered sooner. But memory does not obey investigators. It does not arrive when demanded. It waits. Sometimes for decades. Sometimes forever. The daughter also remembered something else. A few weeks after the murder, Kane had changed his routine. He stopped driving through Bellwether. He stopped working certain delivery routes. He became angry whenever Laura's name appeared in the newspaper. At the time, his family thought he was simply frightened by the investigation. Now they wondered whether he was frightened for another reason. The old newspaper clippings were examined again. One article mentioned that police had recovered a fingerprint from the refrigerator. That detail had been published. Kane would have known investigators had evidence. But no match was found. The fingerprint remained unidentified. Perhaps that was why he believed he was safe. Perhaps he believed the case would disappear. For decades, he was right. Until technology changed the equation. The fingerprint was scanned. The old evidence was digitized. The family was traced. The DNA was reconstructed. The records were reopened. The memories returned. And suddenly, the man who had lived without fear for years was no longer invisible. But there was one final question. Why did Kane leave the fingerprint? The answer may have been painfully simple. He was not thinking about evidence. He was thinking about Laura. He was thinking about the confrontation. He was thinking about escaping. He was thinking about the documents he wanted. He was thinking about his injured hand. He was thinking about survival. He was not thinking about 31 years in the future. He could not have imagined investigators examining his fingerprints with technology that did not exist. He could not have imagined forensic genealogy. He could not have imagined digital evidence reconstruction. He could not have imagined that his own family would eventually help identify him. But evidence does not need a suspect to cooperate. It only needs time. And time had been waiting. Laura's case became a warning to investigators everywhere. Never assume an old fingerprint is worthless. Never assume an old note means nothing. Never assume a forgotten witness has nothing to add. Never assume a cold case is truly cold, because sometimes the evidence is not dead. It is sleeping. And when someone finally wakes it, 31 years can disappear in a matter of weeks. The final archive report contained one sentence that summarized the entire investigation. The identity of the probable offender was established through the cumulative evaluation of physical, documentary, testimonial, and forensic evidence. It was clinical, cold, official. But behind those words was a woman who had once walked through a California neighborhood believing she had time. She did not. And behind the evidence was a man who believed he could bury one night forever. He could not. The house was gone. The street had changed. The people had moved on. But the fingerprint remained. And in the end, it was the smallest thing that became the loudest. A few ridges pressed against cold metal. A silent mark. Left behind by a hand. A hand that investigators believe belonged to the man who ended Laura Bennett's life. 31 years later, that hand had finally been given a name. The name was Arthur Kane. But a name was not enough. For the people who had spent 31 years waiting, a name could feel like justice and still leave a hole where justice should have been. There would be no courtroom. No prosecutor standing before 12 jurors. No defense attorney challenging the evidence. No judge reading a sentence. Arthur Kane had died 9 years before detectives connected him to Laura Bennett's murder. He would never answer the questions. He would never explain the blood on the payphone. He would never explain the false timeline. He would never explain the notebook. He would never explain why Laura had written that she knew who he was. And he would never explain what happened behind the closed door of that small California house. For Laura's family, that absence was almost as painful as the murder itself. They had spent decades imagining the moment when someone would finally be caught. They imagined handcuffs. They imagined an interrogation. They imagined a confession. Instead, they received a file, a conclusion, and the photograph of a dead man. But as investigators examined the case one final time, they discovered that the truth had been closer to Laura than anyone realized. The old accounting records reveal that Kane had not simply been involved in questionable transactions. He had been desperate. The amount of money was not enormous, but the scheme had been growing. Payments had been redirected. Invoices had been fabricated. Work orders had been altered. Laura had begun keeping copies. She had discovered a pattern. And the more she investigated, the more Kane realized she knew. That was why the confrontation at the hardware store mattered. It was not simply an argument between coworkers. It was a warning. Laura was telling Kane that she had evidence. Kane was telling Laura to stop. She refused. 3 days later, she was dead. Investigators reconstructed her final evening minute by minute. At 9:18 p.m., Laura returned home. At 10:13 p.m., she called police about a man following her. At 11:42 p.m., she called the payphone. At 11:47 p.m., Arthur Kane purchased gasoline. At 11:50 p.m., his truck was seen near the payphone. At approximately midnight, Laura and Kane were seen arguing. Shortly afterward, Kane's truck left the area. Within minutes, Laura returned home. Then came the final sequence. A door opening. A confrontation. A chair moving. A struggle. A hand touching the refrigerator. A fingerprint. A wound. A drop of blood. Then silence. The reconstruction was compelling. But investigators were careful. They called it the most likely sequence, not absolute fact. Because the dead do not leave complete timelines behind. They leave fragments. And investigators must decide how those fragments fit together. One of the most important fragments came from Laura herself. The hidden note. I know who he is. That sentence had originally seemed incomplete. Now investigators believed they understood its meaning. Laura knew Kane was involved in the financial scheme. She believed he had been following her. She feared he would confront her. She may even have suspected that he intended to silence her. But she did not know how far he was willing to go. That uncertainty may have been the final mistake. She opened the door. Because she knew him. Because she believed she could confront him. Because she believed the argument would end with words. Instead, the argument became violence. The chair underneath, which Kane's fingerprint was found, may have been moved during the struggle. Laura may have tried to stand. Kane may have grabbed her. The chair may have fallen sideways. The refrigerator may have been touched as he moved across the kitchen. His hand may have been injured during the confrontation. The blood found later at the pay phone suggested that he had been bleeding before or after the encounter. And then he left. He drove away from Alder Street. He returned home. He washed his hands. He changed clothes. He told his family he had cut himself while working. The next morning, he went back to ordinary life. That was the part that haunted investigators. How easily violence could disappear into routine. A murder could happen at midnight. By morning, the world could look normal again. Cars moved through the streets. Stores opened. People bought coffee. Children went to school. And somewhere among them, a man who had apparently just killed someone could simply continue living. For Laura's mother, that was unbearable. Evelyn Bennett died before the case was reopened. She never learned the name investigators eventually attached to the murder. Her daughter Rachel did. And Rachel kept one promise. She placed Laura's photograph beside her mother's grave. Not because the case was finally solved. Because Laura's life deserved to be remembered separately from the crime. The photograph showed Laura smiling. Young. Alive. Unaware that the future would turn her into a name in a cold case archive. Rachel later said that was the image she wanted people to remember. Not the crime scene photographs. Not the newspaper headlines. Not the blood. Laura smiling. That became the final emotional center of the investigation. Because true crime can become obsessed with darkness. But the victim existed before the darkness. Laura had dreams. She had plans. She had a family. She had a future. That future was taken from her. And no fingerprint, no DNA profile, no investigative breakthrough could restore it. The evidence could only answer one question. Who most likely did it? It could never answer the larger question. Why did Laura have to die? The motive appeared to be fear. Fear that she would expose Kane. Fear that financial misconduct would be discovered. Fear that his life would collapse. But motive is not justification. It is simply an explanation of what may have driven a person toward an irreversible act. Kane made a choice. Laura paid the price. And the evidence survived that choice. Years after the case was classified as solved, the original fingerprint was transferred to a climate-controlled archive. The envelope was preserved. The photographs were digitized. The audio recording was copied. The notebook was sealed. The case became part of California's growing collection of historic cold cases solved through modern forensic techniques. But the fingerprint remained the symbol. Investigators often described it as the clue that refused to disappear. A mark left casually, almost invisibly. Yet it survived longer than the killer, longer than the house, longer than the payphone, longer than the original investigation, longer than the people who first examined it. It survived because evidence does not need to understand its own importance. The killer did not know what he had left behind. The investigator in 1981 could not know what technology would become available decades later. Laura could not know that one day someone would open the old file and see connections hidden inside it. But the connections were there. waiting. And that is what makes the case so haunting. The mystery was never empty. It was full of answers. The answers were simply scattered across 31 years. A fingerprint here. A receipt there. A forgotten memory. A hidden note. A damaged tape. A family photograph. A bloodstain. A vehicle record. A notebook. Piece by piece, the past reconstructed itself. And when the final pieces were placed together, the face of a suspected killer emerged from the shadows. Arthur Kane. A man who had once been ordinary. A man who had once been trusted. A man whose name had appeared in the original investigation but had never become the focus. A man who died believing the case would remain unsolved. He was wrong. Because the last witness was not a person. It was a fingerprint. And it had been waiting 31 years to speak. The fingerprint had spoken. But the case still had one final secret. It was hidden inside the original police evidence log. The handwriting belonged to Detective Martin Hale, one of the first investigators assigned to Laura's murder. Hale had retired in 1998. He died in 2011. But before his death, he had written a private note about the case. It was never included in the official report. It was found among his personal papers by his daughter. The note was dated November 3, 1981. Only 16 days after Laura was killed. It contained a name. Arthur Kane. Underneath it, Hale had written, "Something doesn't fit." That sentence forced investigators to reconsider the original investigation. Why had Kane not been treated as a serious suspect? The answer was buried in the department's old case notes. Kane had been questioned. He had provided an alibi. He claimed he spent the entire night at home. His wife confirmed it. At the time, investigators accepted her statement. There was no reason to challenge it. But the reopened investigation revealed that Kane's wife had not actually seen him during the critical hours. She had gone to bed early. She remembered hearing him enter the house later. She assumed he had been working. That assumption had become an alibi. It was never verified. Hale had apparently noticed the problem. He had interviewed Kane's wife again. But before he could pursue the contradiction, the investigation shifted toward other suspects. Michael Ross. Stephen Hall. Unknown men. Random theories. Every new possibility pushed Kane further into the background. Hale's private note suggested he had never fully accepted that. He had written another sentence. Vehicle description may connect Kane. Then another. Print should be retained. That was all. 3 lines. But those lines explained something investigators had never understood. The original detective had suspected Kane. He simply lacked the evidence to prove it. The fingerprint was the reason he wanted the case preserved. He believed it might matter someday. He was right. 3 decades later, it did. The discovery changed how the family understood the investigation. Laura's mother had always believed police had ignored certain possibilities. She had been right. Not because investigators did not care. Because the evidence did not cooperate. The technology did not exist. Witnesses were uncertain. Records disappeared. And every day the case remained unsolved made it harder to reconstruct. Yet Hale's private note revealed that the investigation had almost reached Kane in 1981. The name had been there. The suspicion had been there. The fingerprint had been there. Everything was present. Except the connection. That connection required time. And time eventually provided it. The reopened investigation also revealed that Kane had returned to the hardware store on the morning after the murder. He arrived before opening. A former employee remembered seeing him. Kane asked whether Laura had left anything behind. The employee assumed he meant personal belongings. Now investigators believed he may have been searching for the missing accounting documents. He was turned away. Later that morning, Kane purchased cleaning supplies. By noon, police had already begun searching Laura's house. The town was filling with rumors. Kane stayed quiet. He did not attend Laura's funeral. That fact had never seemed suspicious. Many co-workers did not attend. But one employee remembered seeing Kane parked across the street. He remained inside his truck. He watched the funeral procession. Then he left. The employee had never told police. He had assumed Kane was grieving. 31 years later, he understood what he may have witnessed. A suspect watching the family of the woman he had allegedly killed. The discovery was chilling, but it also showed the limits of memory. The witness could not remember the exact date. He could not remember what Kane was wearing. He could only remember the truck. The truck. Always the truck. Dark blue. A vehicle that appeared repeatedly in the investigation. Near the payphone. Near Laura Street. Near the funeral. And registered to Arthur Kane. One of the detectives reconstructed the route. From Kane's home. To the gas station. To Alder Street. Back toward his home. The journey took less than 25 minutes. There was no need for complicated planning. No elaborate escape. Just a familiar vehicle moving through familiar streets. That simplicity made the crime even more disturbing. Kane did not need a hidden identity. He did not need a secret location. He knew the town. He knew Laura. He knew the house. He knew the neighborhood. And he knew that no one was watching closely enough. For 31 years, that assumption worked. Then the old case was opened again. The fingerprint was scanned. The notebook was examined. The blood evidence was tested. The witness memories were collected. The accounting records were reconstructed. The pieces aligned. Not perfectly. Not with the absolute certainty of a confession. But strongly enough for investigators to conclude that Arthur Kane was responsible. The district attorney reviewed the case. Because Kane was deceased, there would be no criminal prosecution. Instead, the office issued a formal investigative conclusion. The report stated that the cumulative evidence supported the determination that Kane had killed Laura Bennett during a confrontation connected to the financial misconduct she had uncovered. For Rachel, the words were difficult to read. She had waited her entire adult life for them. When she finally received the report, she did not celebrate. She simply sat quietly. Then she opened an old photograph album. Laura was on the first page. Rachel looked at her sister's face. And for the first time in decades, she did not have to wonder who had taken her away. She knew. That knowledge did not bring Laura back. It did not erase the years. It did not undo the funeral. It did not change the empty bedroom. But it closed one door. Not every door. There were still questions. What exactly happened inside the kitchen? What did Laura say? What did Kane say? Was the murder planned? Or did the confrontation suddenly become violent? No surviving evidence could answer those questions. Perhaps that is the part of a story that will always remain beyond reach. But the larger mystery had finally been answered. The fingerprint had done what the investigators of 1981 hoped it might someday do. It had survived. And when technology caught up with it, it became a witness. A silent witness. A witness that never forgot. The old refrigerator was gone. The kitchen was gone. The house was gone. But the fingerprint remained. And that tiny mark became the bridge between two worlds. The world of 1981 and the world of 2012. Between an investigation that had failed to identify a killer and an investigation that finally named one. 31 years separated those moments, but the evidence connected them. That is the strange power of a cold case. The past does not disappear. It waits. Sometimes for decades. Sometimes until everyone who remembers the victim is gone. Sometimes until the suspect himself is buried. And sometimes all it takes to bring the truth back is a single fingerprint. One old mark. One forgotten trace. One piece of evidence that refuses to die. Laura Bennett's case began with a scream over a telephone line. It ended with a name written into a forensic report. Between those two moments was 31 years of silence. And inside that silence was a truth that had been waiting all along. But even after the case was considered solved, one question refused to disappear. How could so many people have missed Arthur Kane? The answer was uncomfortable. Because in 1981, Kane did not look like a killer. He looked like a coworker, a repairman, a husband, a father, a man with a job, a man who could stand inside a police station, answer questions, shake an investigator's hand, and walk back into the night. There was nothing about his appearance that announced danger. Nothing that made people step away. Nothing that made detectives immediately suspect him. That was precisely why the case had remained unsolved for so long. The killer had not needed to hide in the darkness. He had simply needed to look ordinary. And Arthur Kane had done exactly that. After the reopening of the investigation, detectives began examining every surviving record connected to him. They found an old employment evaluation. His supervisor had described him as dependable, quiet, hardworking, occasionally argumentative. Nothing more. There was no history of serious violence, no documented assault, no pattern that would have made investigators immediately think murder. But buried beneath the routine paperwork was a complaint from September 1981. A female customer had reported that Kane had remained inside her home after completing a repair. She said he had asked personal questions. Whether she lived alone. Whether she had a boyfriend. Whether anyone would be coming home soon. The company had investigated. Kane denied doing anything inappropriate. The complaint was closed. No disciplinary action followed. The customer was never connected to Laura's case. But the complaint showed something investigators had never understood. Laura's experience may not have been unique. Kane may have crossed boundaries before. He may have learned how to enter people's homes, how to gain trust, how to appear harmless, how to observe, and how to leave without creating suspicion. The discovery made Laura's final weeks look different. When she said she believed someone was watching her, perhaps she was not imagining it. When she warned her sister about Kane, perhaps she knew exactly what she feared. And when she wrote, "I know who he is," perhaps she had finally understood the danger. There was another detail. The original police photographs showed Laura's kitchen table. On it were several sheets of paper. At the time, investigators considered them ordinary household documents. Decades later, enhanced imaging revealed handwriting beneath one of the pages. A partial word. Payments. The rest was obscured. Investigators digitally reconstructed the image. The paper underneath contained a list of dates and dollar amounts. Several corresponded with the financial records tied to Kane. Laura had apparently been building a case. She was not merely suspicious. She was documenting. That meant the confrontation between Laura and Kane may have been inevitable. She had evidence. He knew she had evidence. And both understood what would happen if the information became public. The mystery of motive became less mysterious. The tragedy became more understandable. And somehow more painful. Because Laura had done what people often do when they believe they have discovered wrongdoing. She trusted facts. She trusted documents. She trusted the idea that exposing the truth would protect her. She may have believed that once Kane understood she had evidence, he would back down. Instead, according to investigators, the opposite happened. He became desperate. The old cassette recording made that clear. His voice was controlled at first, then angry, then threatening. Laura refused to surrender the documents. The recording ended before the argument was resolved. 3 days later, she was dead. That timing was impossible to ignore. The final investigation report, therefore, described the killing as a likely escalation from an ongoing dispute. Not a random attack. Not a burglary. Not a stranger entering an unlocked house. A confrontation between two people who already knew each other. One wanted the truth exposed. The other wanted it buried. And Laura paid the ultimate price. The case file was eventually digitized. Every photograph, every report, every evidence log, every interview. The old fingerprint was scanned at high resolution and stored alongside modern forensic findings. For the first time, investigators could view the entire case on a single screen. They could move from Laura's photograph to the kitchen, from the kitchen to the fingerprint, from the fingerprint to Kane, from Kane to the financial records, from the financial records to the cassette recording, from the recording to Laura's warning. The story that had once seemed fragmented had become one continuous chain. And yet the chain still contained gaps. That is something investigators were careful to acknowledge. The case could be reconstructed. It could be explained. But it could never be witnessed again. The only person who knew exactly what happened inside Laura's house was dead. Laura was dead. Kane was dead. The original detectives were mostly gone. The house was gone. The physical objects were disappearing. The witnesses were aging. The evidence was becoming the only surviving participant. And that is what made the old fingerprint so powerful. It did not change its story. It did not forget. It did not reinterpret what it had seen. It simply remained where it had been left, waiting. The final forensic report did not describe the fingerprint as dramatic. There was no sensational language, no mysteri. Just measurements, ridge characteristics, points of comparison, a conclusion. But when investigators read that conclusion alongside everything else, the meaning became enormous. A tiny mark had survived a lifetime. A man had died. A house had disappeared. A family had grown old. And still, the mark remained. 31 years later, it helped lead investigators to the truth. Not because it suddenly became something different, because the world around it finally became capable of understanding it. That may be the most haunting lesson of Laura Bennett's case. Evidence does not always fail. Sometimes investigators simply arrive before the evidence is ready to speak. And sometimes they arrive decades later. By then, the victim's voice may be gone. The suspect may be gone. The witnesses may be gone. But the evidence can remain, waiting patiently for the right technology, the right question, the right investigator, and one moment when someone finally looks closely enough. Laura's family eventually stopped asking whether the case would ever be solved. Instead, they began asking a different question. How many other cold cases were waiting for someone to look again? Because if one fingerprint could survive 31 years, what else might be hidden inside old evidence rooms across California? Old photographs, old clothing, old fingerprints, old biological samples, old notebooks, old mistakes, old assumptions. Every unsolved case contained possibilities. Laura's case had simply proved it. The final image associated with the investigation was not the crime scene. It was Laura's photograph. She was smiling. The photograph was taken before the murder, before the fear, before the investigation, before the newspaper headlines, before the fingerprint. She was simply Laura, 27 years old, alive. That was how her family wanted her remembered. Not as a cold case victim, not as a name in an archive, not as the woman whose murder took 31 years to understand. As Laura, the woman who noticed something was wrong, the woman who tried to expose it, the woman who warned the people she loved, the woman whose final evidence survived longer than her killer. And somewhere inside the archive, the original fingerprint remains. A tiny pattern pressed into a surface inside a quiet California kitchen. No sound. No movement. No confession. Just ridges. A silent witness. 31 years later, those ridges helped pull a killer's name out of the darkness. And perhaps that is why the case still refuses to disappear. Because the killer believed the night would end. He believed the house would fall silent. He believed the documents could be destroyed. He believed the investigation would fade. He believed time would protect him. But time did something else. It preserved the evidence. And when the right person finally opened the box, the past came back. Not with a scream. Not with a confession. Not with a dramatic arrest. With a fingerprint. One small mark. Left behind by a hand that could no longer answer for itself. And after 31 years, that was enough to make the silence speak.